Hi, everyone, and welcome to Project Wingspan Ontario's Module 4, Target Plant Species Identification. We've developed our native plant species list by choosing some of the species that are commonly sought by a variety of organizations in this area. Generally speaking, we plan to target species that would benefit the monarch butterfly. In this case, we're interested in native milkweed species that serve as the monarch's larval host, bloom throughout the growing season, meaning we want at least 3 species blooming in spring, 3 in summer, and 3 more in fall. We also want to provide a diverse flower morphology. So this means differences in shape and structure of the flower in order to cater to the diverse needs of multiple pollinating species. With these factors as a guide, let's take a look at some of the species from our target list. The rest are posted to our website, which you can find in the link in our next slides. This module will provide basic identification information for each species, and if applicable, lookalikes that you should be aware of as you search for your intended plant. This might feel like too much information all at once, but think about what was said previously about starting small, and we hope you will pick up on a few tricks that'll help you in the field. In this module, our learning goals will be to recall some key terms used in plant biology to assist in identification, to recognize that many plants have lookalikes, and some can be invasive or rare, to differentiate between at least one target plant and the species they could be confused for, as well as the goal of having you identify 2 to 3 target species from our list, noting the bloom times so that they can assist you in knowing when seeds are going to be available. As a reminder, our Project Wingspan Resource Hub has lots of information to support you on collecting, growing, and redistributing native plants. To assist with identifying the plants on our target native plant species list, we strongly recommend you follow along using our native plant profiles. We have multiple versions designed for assisting you with plant ID in the field and to be used alongside your learning. Although not necessary, you might also find it helpful to purchase a field guide or download an app like iNaturalist to assist in accurate plant ID. Apps are not always 100% accurate, so if you're unsure, always double check your identification with a second source and make sure that the plant is not rare, at risk, or endangered in the area you found it before disturbing the plant or harvesting seeds. Here's a review of how to use the plant profiles. Each profile outlines the approximate bloom times, marked by the flower icon, and seed set, which is marked by the seed icon. Descriptions are also present to assist in identification, as well as a list of some plant pollinator interactions and some species that could be confused beyond the species that we'll look at in this module. You can download a simplified version for taking notes to assist with learning, or the complete booklet, which includes illustrations to assist in identification, including close-ups of key identifiers of target species, plus a section highlighting a species it could be confused with for all species on the current target species list. So here's our target species list. These species are all considered common in Ontario, but common is a relative term. It's important to note that even if a plant is considered to be common, it might not be found everywhere. So always do your research. Go to our website for the most updated list because the needs of collecting species from this list might change over time. If we were to focus solely on knowing the way that flowers look for each of these species, it would only be helpful to you in the small time frame where the plants are actually in bloom. You may already recognize these plants we will introduce to you while they are in bloom, but not yet recognize the plants in different life stages, such as their leafy growth phase, budding, or once the flowers have gone to seed. If you can recognize the floral structures of plants, you are not limited by the flowers alone. It is helpful to familiarize yourself, even just visually, with these next slides. Most field guides will have a section outlining floral structures and leaf shape, so this will help you. Some apps will assist in identifying plants with a picture, but beware because this is not always accurate, as we mentioned prior. Understanding the basic floral and leaf structures is an important part of identifying flowering plants, and if you learn a few of the terms used with floral and leaf structures, they will assist you in a quicker and more confident identification. For our needs, most notable structures are umbel, panicle, and composite arrangements. Feel free to pause this slide to review the diagrams or come back to it if needed. Understanding leaf structures will provide you with key characteristics for proper plant ID. Over the next slides, you'll hear us talk about leaf shape, margins, attachments, and arrangements. While you don't need to master these terms, the better understanding you have, the faster you can identify plants. Some key areas to review to support you in the next section: leaf shape, lanceolate or ovate. Leaf margins are referring to the edge of the leaf. Some other terms for leaf margins are entire, referring to the smooth edge, toothed, which refers to dentate, serrate, crenate, and a few others, and lobed, which includes pinnatifid and palmatifid margins. Leaf base, stem clasping. This means that the leaf base clasps the stem, as you would see in New England aster, and profoliate, as if the stem is piercing through the leaf, what you would see in boneset. Other leaf attachment methods are clasping, sessile, and petiole, and arrangements that might be valuable to us during this section is opposite, alternate, and whorled. Again, you might want to pause or replay this slide to review the leaf structures before moving on to our plants.
Moving into the Project Wingspan Ontario plant list, the first plant we have up is hairy beard tongue. This plant is called beard tongue due to the hairs that line the protruding lower petal of the flower, which you'll see on the next couple of slides. Hairy beard tongue can be found in rocky fields, bluffs, open woods, and generally dry sites. It will typically bloom in midsummer and will attract a variety of bees, butterflies, and moths. Hairy beard tongue has stalked clusters of flowers that are white to purple and are trumpet-shaped, long, and tubular. It is often identified by its erect, hairy stems, usually with multiple shoots growing from a single rhizome, which is kind of like an underground stem growing horizontally. The plant can grow up to about 2 feet tall with leaves that are velvety, oppositely arranged, and stemless. Because hairy beard tongue belongs to a large genus with many species, including ornamental garden varieties, it's important to look out for lookalikes. Foxglove beard tongue is the species you would most likely confuse hairy beard tongue with when in the field. We're going to get into more details of this on the next slide. Notice the flowers of foxglove beard tongue are white, more open, and have delicate violet nectar guides. Even more helpful to distinguish this from our target species are the hairless leaves, which also tend to be more green than the red-tinged leaves of hairy beard tongue.
Next up, we've got one that most learners are already likely familiar with: common milkweed. As we've learned in an earlier module, multiple milkweed species play a significant role as the larval host for monarchs, and they're also a great food source for a wide range of pollinators. Common milkweed is a midsummer blooming perennial that's native to much of Canada, and it does best at colonizing disturbed sites, but can be found in a wide array of habitats. Milkweed flowers grow in round clusters that grow from the base of the upper leaves and are light to dark pink. Each plant has a single stem with opposite leaves, and both the stem and leaves are covered in small hairs, and each of the leaves has a prominent central vein. Milkweeds grow seed pods, which are pretty conspicuous in the later months, and these pods are about 3 to 4 inches long with a bit of a prickly or warty surface. You are unlikely to confuse this species in many parts of Ontario, but prairie milkweed, an uncommon species, is only found in extreme southern Ontario, and it does look familiar. As prairie milkweed is a rare species in Ontario, it's important to not disturb these plants, and if you're unsure about your identification, simply do not collect from the plant in question. Prairie milkweed has hairless leaves that are often angled upward. It has fewer flowers per cluster than common milkweed and smoother seed pods. Note here that the seed pods are a very different color. Because this plant is listed as rare, remember to follow ethical best practices and avoid collecting seed from this plant when found in the wild.
Now we're going to take a look at a shrub called buttonbush, and shrubs are important. An important feature of healthy habitat is having a mix of strata from short herbaceous plants to protective taller woody plants like buttonbush here. This is another plant with a pretty broad range, but you'll usually find it in wet areas, sometimes adjacent to standing water like lakes or creeks. The buttonbush is a larval host for 24 species, such as the buttonbush leaf miner and buttonbush sphinx moths, but it's also attractive to a number of pollinators, including even hummingbirds. Buttonbush is a multi-stemmed shrub that can grow up to 20 feet tall, though you'll usually see it up to 8 feet. It's easily identified in the field by its unique flower heads, which, as you can see, sort of resemble a pincushion. Leaves are smooth and usually oppositely arranged, but may occasionally come in whorls or clusters of three. This is a great plant for wet sites or areas needing erosion control, as it can grow and spread pretty quickly. And there really isn't anything else that looks a ton like this plant native to Ontario, at least in terms of shrubs. So you're probably pretty safe as long as you can identify the flowers and the mature fruits. There are two species that you might confuse it for. These are common ninebark and red osier dogwood. For this module, we'll focus on dogwood as the reddish stem and leaf structures are a little bit trickier. But you can learn more about both of these lookalikes in the plant profiles booklet. The flowers of red osier dogwood are umbel-shaped with four white bracts that are often mistaken for flower petals, so quite different from the spherical flowers of the buttonbush. The flowers and berries present on dogwoods are pretty big distinguishers, and they're what you want to look for, as the leaves can look pretty similar and even the young stems can be deceiving. One last thing that's important to note is that in older parts of the stem, you'll see a red that's sometimes dotted with grayish pores, whereas buttonbush ages into a more bark-like gray appearance.
Another milkweed species on our list, and one that can sometimes be confused with common milkweed, is swamp milkweed. As their name tells us, this species of milkweed prefers moist to wet areas and can be found in swamps and wet meadows. They're also tolerant of well-drained soils, but prefer moisture. So how does swamp milkweed differ from common milkweed? Leaves and pods look quite different, as do the seeds when seen side by side. Leaves are long, lanceolate, hairless, and without that prominent central vein. The pods are similar in length, but narrow and tear-shaped, with a smooth surface. Flowers are small, a deeper shade of pink, with clusters that aren't quite as round as the other milkweeds we've discussed so far. And another common name for it is rose milkweed, which helps with reminding us about that color difference. One plant that swamp milkweed can occasionally be confused for is common dogbane, as this also tends to be present in wet areas. Leaves are shaped similarly, but pods are long and skinny, stems are red, and flowers are white. Although swamp milkweed can occasionally have a reddish-green stem, dogbane has multiple, more pronounced reddish-brown stems per plant. White flowers with forward-facing petals only. So with milkweed, they kind of have petals that face in the opposite direction of each other. And long, thin seed pods that are shaped a bit like a vanilla bean. The seeds are also much, much smaller and thinner.
Next, we've got Virginia mountain mint. Much like other plants in the mint family, it can be an aggressive grower, especially in moist soils. The plant is native to Ontario, Quebec, and New Brunswick, and is often found in places like wet prairies and stream edges. Virginia mountain mint has tiny white flowers that are often spotted with a little bit of purple and are arranged in small, dense clusters. It has a square stem with small white lines of hair along each of the four edges. A square stem is a pretty good giveaway that a plant is from the mint family. It's also got oppositely arranged leaves that are half an inch to a quarter inch wide. And when mature, the seed heads are grayish and smell strongly of mint when crushed. One plant that you may confuse Virginia mountain mint with is narrowleaf mountain mint. The range of our target species, Virginia mountain mint, goes a little further north, but also note that the narrowleaf mountain mint is listed as vulnerable in Ontario, so we really want to take care of the species and make sure we're not misidentifying it. The flowers of these two plants look extremely similar, so not the best feature to go to when trying to differentiate them. A better approach is to look at the stem of narrowleaf mountain mint, which is hairless. And then the leaves, which are thin and give a less dense appearance, hence the name narrow leaf mountain mint.
Black-eyed Susan is one that most viewers probably also know, or if not, you will recognize them from the picture. It's a native plant that manages to wind up in a lot of gardens and has cultivated varieties similar to other coneflowers. One reason is because this plant is super adaptable. It tolerates a multitude of soil types and can physically adapt to herbivory or mowing pressures. When collecting this species seeds for conservation or habitat enhancement activities, always ensure you have the appropriate identification and you are not collecting cultivars of the original native species. Black-eyed Susan is part of the aster family, so it has a composite flower head, and one that's pretty iconic. You can see it's got the dark disc flowers in the center and long, slender yellow ray flowers extending out. Beyond the flower, it can also be identified by its hairy leaves and stem. The plant itself is about 2.5 feet tall, with leaves up to 7 inches long. And as you move up the stem from the ground, the leaves disappear and the dense hairs are more noticeable. Brown-eyed Susan is native to the US and is present in many gardens across North America. It is considered exotic in Ontario, but has occasionally escaped from cultivation. Side by side, they look very different, but you could see how someone might confuse black-eyed Susan for brown-eyed Susan. Always be mindful to not collect seed from plants whose ID you are not absolutely sure of. There are many species of yellow asters, so it's possible to get a little confused. To differentiate between the black and brown-eyed Susans, pay attention to the long, slender, and hairy leaves of the black-eyed Susan compared to the wider leaves and more stout petals of this brown-eyed Susan. Additionally, brown-eyed Susan tend to bloom more densely and look more shrubby than the black-eyed Susan.
Next is the common evening primrose. This species is biennial, meaning its life cycle occurs over 2 seasons. Only the basal leaves are present in the first year, and the tall spike of flowers occurs in the second year of growth. This plant is native to much of Canada. It's drought tolerant and does well in full sun to part shade, and it can be found in a wide range of relatively dry locations. Common evening primrose has yellow flowers with 4 heart-shaped petals. The flowers open in the evening and close in the late morning and have a sweet smell that attracts night pollinating moths, which is pretty cool. And they're also pollinated by other insects, including bees in the evening and in the morning. If you take a look at the photo in the middle top, you can see that the flowers have 4 retracted sepals, which are the structures opposite to the petals. And these sepals do not have a knob near the top, which is going to help you distinguish it from other species, as you'll see in the slides to come. The stem is greenish red and has lots of fine hairs. Typically, it's got a single stem and blooms from the bottom to the top, but sometimes it can be branched. Another good way to ID it is through the bottom leaves, which branch out in a rosette. If you look closely at the leaves, you can see that there are smaller secondary leaves at the base of each leaf as well. Common evening primrose can be confused with small flowered evening primrose. Be mindful as well that there are some non-native varieties present in gardens. So a few things to keep in mind when differentiating these species. The small flowered evening primrose, as you might have guessed, has smaller flowers than common evening primrose. It also has a knob near the tips of the sepals that common evening primrose doesn't. And the tips of the seed capsules flare outward, as you can see in the middle image.
Spotted Joe pieweed is another really showy plant that some of you may be familiar with. This plant can be found across Canada in many habitats, but generally prefers moist to wet soils. It takes a good amount of water to keep the tall stems upright. There are other species of Joe pieweeds to distinguish from this one. However, the spotted Joe pieweed, as the name might suggest, is distinguishable by the purple spots along the stem. Here too, the stems are slightly fuzzy. Also note in the pictures the dense, flat-topped flower heads, known as panicles, and where the leaves attach to the stem. It is not swollen, which you will see in our lookalike. This can help you distinguish it from other Joe pie. So spotted Joe pieweed can be confused with sweet Joe pieweed, and if you look even side by side, these do look pretty similar. So here's an example of that swollen purplish node where the leaves attach to the stem. The spotted Joe Pye weed doesn't have that. Additionally, the similar species, sweet Joe Pye, displays a dome-shaped flower head rather than the dense, flat-topped flower that you saw on the previous slide.
Next up is blue vervain, and this is a really cool looking plant in my opinion. It grows best in moist areas such as wet meadows and stream banks, and it's also a larval host for the common buckeye butterfly, which is pictured here. Blue vervain has numerous pointed flower spikes that branch upwards, kind of looks like a candelabra, and each flower spike has a ring of bluish purple flowers. It's also got a square stem and oppositely arranged leaves with toothed edges and pretty rough texture. One plant that it could be mistaken for is hoary vervain. To me, the biggest giveaway between the two is that hoary vervain has rounded tops, unlike blue vervain's pointed tops. Hoary vervain also has relatively short leaves and no petioles, so the leaf extends directly from the stem, unlike in blue vervain.
Wild bergamot is one of my favorites to collect because, as the common name implies, it smells fantastic, even as you're processing the teeny tiny seeds. It's found in many places, but generally likes full to part sun. Bee balm, pictured later, is a red-colored, cultivated variety that can also be called bergamot. Though its flowers do not share the same color, they have similar features, and we don't want anyone to confuse these plants when collecting seed. Wild bergamot is almost Seussian or cartoonish, which makes it very recognizable when it blooms in the field. This flower can range from purple to white, but for the most part, you'll see it in between as pink. Each flower has a curved lower lip and a straight upper lip, with tufts of hairs at the top. The leaves are coarsely toothed and are hairy on the underside. Stems are square, and a good way to observe this is to roll it between your fingers, where you'll feel the distinct edges of the stem. Actually, this is a characteristic of most plants in the mint family, and you would see this in vervain and mountain mint from earlier. There really isn't much that this can be confused with, at least in terms of native plants, in the range around Ontario, but look out for horticultural varieties, which tend to be red or deep red, as mentioned before. So the two plants side by side look similar, but quite different. The most distinct differences you will find between the two species are the distinct red petals and bracts, as well as the lack of a reddish-gray tone on the stem and leaves of bee balm. The lanceolate leaves are also less toothed than the native species. It's important to note that both species are prone to powdery mildew, which can cause leaves to take on a blotchy, grayish appearance. This is why observing the differences in leaf shape and other growth habits will help you confirm species ID, particularly when the plants are not in bloom.
Next is common boneset, which is a summer bloomer, tolerates full sun all the way to shade, and prefers moist soils. Boneset has composite flower heads that are made up of many white disc flowers with no ray petals, which are those outer petals that typically look a bit more pretty. As you can see in this picture on the bottom left, seeds are wind dispersed. So you'll see it start to get kind of fluffy in late season. The stems are covered in long white hairs, and the leaves are opposite and perfoliate, meaning that the stem appears to be growing right through one huge leaf, as you can see in the picture on the right. One plant that common boneset can be confused with is tall boneset. The flowers and seeds look pretty much the same in these two species, so these aren't good features to look at. The best way to tell them apart is to look at the leaves, where common boneset has those perfoliate leaves that make the stem look like it's passing right through one big leaf. Tall boneset does not. So that's a pretty good giveaway between these two.
Goldenrod species are pollinator powerhouses. Euthymia graminefolia, or grass-leaved goldenrod, is a lesser-known species. Goldenrods can be difficult to differentiate between, and this one can also be difficult to identify. Get to know this plant by observing them at different life stages, and consider scouting for it while it is flowering between July and September, leaving a marker, like a piece of string, for seed collection at a later date. Goldenrods can be found throughout Canada, and this species is no different. It really just needs sun and some open areas. I mentioned that this plant can be a bit hard to identify, and that's because of its long, slender leaves that may resemble grass when it's younger. When in the field, make sure to note the veins along the leaves and the thin lines of fine white hairs. I find that the underside of the leaf almost feels like a cat's tongue when you rub it in the opposite direction. Similar to spotted Joe pieweed, this flowers in dense, flat, but yellow clusters. Often you'll see a single stem emerging from the soil with a lot of branching as you move toward the top of the plant. Finally, this species can be distinguished by getting in really close to look at the very thin ray petals of the individual flowers. A final tip is that no other goldenrod has these black spots. This really helps in the field, but don't only go by this trick. Some might not have these spots. Note that the lookalike is extremely rare, so be mindful of collecting your grass-leaved goldenrod if you're collecting within the range of the plains grass-leaf goldenrod. So if you're in extreme southern Ontario, you would want to be mindful of really making sure that you're identifying the right species. As this species is very rare and only found in extreme southern parts of Ontario, I'm going to skip through this a little bit quickly, but you can pause to read more. This is a good reminder of following good ethics and best practices around rare plants. So always confirm ID to ensure you're not harvesting from rare or endangered plants. If you're not sure, err on the side of caution and move on. The species that you're more likely to come across and be confused by is Canada goldenrod. Canada goldenrod is tall and hardy, but can have a variety of morphs in the leaves and stem. It tends to have more flowers present than grassleaf goldenrod, and though they are very different, to an untrained eye, goldenrods, just like the asters we will be reviewing in our next slides, look the same. With experience and time, these things will become more apparent, but it also helps to have a keen eye for details.
Next, we've got Pearly Everlasting. This one's a summer to fall blooming perennial that's native across much of Canada. It prefers full sun to part shade and dry, sandy, gravelly soils, so you can often find it in dry prairies, open woods, and roadsides. This plant also is a larval host for a butterfly species, in this case, the painted lady, as you can see on this slide. Pearly Everlasting produces clusters of rounded white flowers with yellow centers, each appearing somewhat like a pearl, hence the name. The leaves are long and slender with green tops and densely white woolly undersides. The stems also have this white woolly quality too. And if you're not totally sure, give the flowers a smell as they tend to have a slightly musky odor. Pearly Everlasting can sometimes be confused with whorled milkweed. This is another plant that's considered to be rare in Ontario, so take care not to disturb it if you're unsure. If you take a close look at whorled milkweed, you'll find that the flowers aren't quite as rounded, so they don't have that same pearly look to them as Pearly Everlasting does. They've also got leaves that are thinner and whorled, meaning that the leaves protrude from the same level and go around the stem, kind of similar to the needles of a pine tree.
The final two slides are tricky, as some asters can have multiple lookalikes. The flat top aster is one of those species. Some might consider aster and goldenrod ID to be more for intermediate experience in native plant ID, so take your time learning these plants because they are difficult. Flat-topped asters range is mostly in the eastern parts of Canada, preferring full sun and moist acidic soils. You might find them in meadows, bordering the edge of a forest, or in moist thickets. Flat-topped aster is known to be irregular and inconsistent, meaning the flowers are irregularly or inconsistently spaced within the same plant. So if you find a flower that looks like this, and it's difficult to pin down, keep that in mind. Also note that the stems are usually unbranched, except for right at the top where it starts to flower. You will also see the edges of the leaves in this species are typically hairy, as are the flower stalks. Here are the two species side by side, flat-topped aster and Ontario aster. Ontario aster is not the only aster that looks similar to flat-topped aster. Between these two species, There are a lot of big differences. The Ontario aster has clumped inflorescences, as you can see in the picture on the right. It's also got broad-toothed leaves that don't have that clasping look.
And the last plant we'll discuss is smooth blue aster. This is a great fall blooming plant that's native to almost all provinces, but not the territories. Asters are good teachers that remind us to properly ID while scouting for the plants before they've gone to seed. Since aster seeds tend to ripen at multiple stages on the same plant, you may be able to see some flowers that will help you during collection, but don't bank on it. Smooth blue aster prefers full sun and dry to medium soils and can be found in open woods and dry to well-drained prairies. Smooth blue aster has pale bluish purple flowers that are about an inch to half an inch wide with 15 to 30 outer petals. The flowers occur in panicles or branches with multiple flowers. The leaves occur alternately and are sessile, meaning that they attach directly to the stem. And common to many asters, older flowers have a reddish center and fresh blooms have a yellow center. There are a lot of whitish blue asters and other flowers, such as fleabanes, that smooth blue aster could be confused with, but one that we're going to focus on is swamp aster. The first thing you'll notice is that swamp aster has a reddish stem, unlike smooth blue aster's green stem. The stem of swamp aster is also quite a bit more hairy, so that's the key feature you'll want to look out for. And one bonus, a species that's even more common and shares similar coloration in those sessile clasping leaves is the New England aster. New England asters are much larger in size, though, both generally in height and also in terms of flower size. So that should be a pretty easy way to tell them apart. But we did want to flag this one since it's such a commonly found plant.
That was a lot to learn. Don't worry if you didn't catch it all. You can always come back to this module or review the notes from our booklet. Even if you can only confidently identify 2 to 3 plants or collect seed from a couple of species on our list, you are contributing to really important work. In this module, we reviewed Project Wingspan Ontario's target native plant species list, and we learned some key terms used in plant biology to assist in identification. You would also be able to recall the importance of double-checking ID before collection, that cultivars look really similar and we don't want to collect those seeds, that rare or invasive species, like the dog strangling vine discussed in previous modules, can be lookalikes to some of the species we're collecting. And you also have learned that goldenrods and asters can be really difficult, so double, triple check when you're confirming identification for these species. You may have also gained confidence to identify 2 to 3 target species from our list and differentiate between at least one target plant and the species they could be confused for. Remember, this knowledge takes time and hands-on experience. Start small and expand your learning slowly. Most importantly, have fun appreciating nature and helping pollinators by collecting and growing seeds.